Oh, yeah.
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 Where is he based?
So he's based in SF, but right now he's in Italy until tomorrow or Friday.
Okay. Hey, Caleb.
How's it going?
It's not a horrible time for you, is it?
No. It's I'm in Italy, so it's like 10:30 a.m. here.
Oh, okay, great.
I
I had a
apologize if
mo
I sound a little weird. I have a bit of a cold, but just minor. It's all good.
No, you're fine. I always have a kind of like moment of I saw that I was preparing for this call and I was like looking up your profile and I saw that you were in SF and I'm like looking at the time and I'm like, oh God, I hope he's not coming if he's in SF.
And
I'm
I
used to
made
it.
sure I wouldn't have done that to him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
don't do that.
I lived in Asia for like a decade, dealing with U.S. clients, so I'm very used to the whole weird time zone thing anyway. So it's all good.
Uh, I mean, I appreciate that, but I don't want you to do it on my accord. So good that you're in Italy.
Appreciate it.
Hope you're having kind of like a good time.
Are you
Yeah,
still
Um,
in
for
Singapore,
sure.
Sukin? I can
I'm
tell you your background is still home.
Yeah, I'm still in Singapore. I'm flying in tomorrow morning.
Oh, I was just there. I flew from Singapore this morning.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
Yeah. I had a long day with Wavemaker yesterday.
well, we can talk about who'd you talk to, Andy?
I spoke to Paul first, and then I had a meeting with Guillaume, with
Okay.
Marie, and another guy. I forgot his name.
Okay.
It
I
was a,
mean,
it was like 5 meetings back to back. It was pretty intense.
it's intense, but hopefully kind of productive. And I mean, Tim,
Very
let us
good,
know
very
if
good.
we can. I mean, I know some of the way like introductions, all that kind of stuff. I mean, let us know how we can help with that.
For sure,
Um,
appreciate it.
okay. This is going. We have to do this properly because that's kind of like how these things go. Even though that I know kind of like Tim well and that stuff, Caleb, I don't know you as well, but Tim kind of told me about this, and Tim and I had dinner, and he was kind of talking to me about this as kind of a thing, and so I have some kind of like knowledge about it. Um, Caleb, maybe for your benefit, hopefully, some context. I was an engineer once upon a time, but that was very, very long ago, and there was no such thing as Kubernetes or microservices in those times. And so I'm familiar with kind of like both of them. Don't have kind of like firsthand kind of like knowledge of them and like that kind of stuff. But can kind of talk as kind of like maybe kind of like a crappy engineer. You can talk to me like a crappy engineer, basically. And but I spent some time with your guys' kind of like deck, and then I spent some time kind of like just getting caught up on Kubernetes a little bit, kind of like, hey, what's new? What's been going on? Kind of like, are more people using it? Who's using it? And all of this kind of stuff. Um, Maybe the first place I want to kind of like start is I always just kind of want to understand kind of like the problem and kind of the space and that kind of stuff, right? And so, and Tim, I know you've been kind of beefing up on this, and so, you can also kind of like jump in here. But I saw in your guys' deck, you're like, okay, Kubernetes growing fast, and by the way, from everything I can kind of like Google and stuff, that seems to be the case, right?
Yeah,
And microservices is something that kind of like I think a little bit kind of like medium or later stage engineering teams kind of like put together, and so more of them are kind of moving on to this, and so that seems to be kind of be the case, and so I'm not going to argue on that pace. It sounds like you guys are kind of focused on maintenance and kind of like upgrades. I think in your guys' deck you were talking about, hey, kind of the Heroku version of this basically has kind of been done, and so like, well, that's not the space we're kind of playing in. We're playing in maintenance and upgrades, and then there was some kind of stats here about that. Let's see, cloud provide like they deprecate kind of like Kubernetes versions kind of every 6 months, and then force upgrades, and then there's kind of like a bunch of like patches that kind of come on. So maybe just talk to me about kind of like why are they deprecating kind of versions so often? Like what are the patches and kind of fixes? Is this just kind of like normal patches and fixes that you would see in kind of like other software projects? Is it kind of more in this case? And then maybe kind of help enlighten me on like what do people have to do if they don't use you guys?
right.
And that way. So maybe just kind of like give me the landscape of kind of like how horrible is this without you guys and how fantastic is it with you guys kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I think so. In terms of deprecations every 6 months,
Yeah.
some cloud providers do it every year, some do it every 6 months. Kubernetes releases every 6 months. And
Oh, okay.
so, they kind of follow that track where they only support, say, 4 or 5 prior versions. So once a new one comes out, they deprecate an old one. So that's the reason for that.
Yep.
The reason that they do new versions so often is because Kubernetes is still a pretty young
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
In the kind of scheme of infrastructure, stuff. We've had Linux for, I don't know, decades now,
Decades,
right?
yeah.
Kubernetes has been around like 10 years ish,
Yep.
maybe less. So, it's pretty young in the scheme of, things, and still moving quite quickly. And they basically end up deprecating stuff relatively often because they change the way things work, right? So,
I see.
maybe they figure out that the way they're scaling things within the cluster is not as efficient as it could be. They make some changes that causes a breaking change, as they call it.
Yep.
Where essentially if you upgrade, you have to change something with your applications or the things running in the cluster in order to keep it compatible. So the way people are doing this currently, it really varies. Like larger companies typically have a platform team that's managing their clusters. They're doing this with their platform team. That's kind of the space we're going after. Smaller companies use someone like my company, my current consultancy, right? They bring us on, we get them set up. As you mentioned, the on-ramp to Kubernetes is kind of solved right now. Like, AWS has their version of it, Azure has their version, et cetera. Getting up and running on it is fairly easy. But about a year in, when they start deprecating versions, companies go, oh, we got to upgrade. Okay, no problem. You can upgrade your cluster with a click of a button, right? In the AWS console, boom, upgrade. Oops, we just broke everything because it's not backwards compatible, right?
Yep.
So it's not only the cluster, but depending on what you're doing within the cluster, particularly in enterprise, they'll be running things like a control plane with networking modules and things like that that could be non-backwards compatible. If you break that, boom, the whole cluster goes down.
Yep.
No communication with anything. And there's like thousands of different modules or add-ons that you could be running depending on the cloud provider to integrate with different things, all that stuff. We're just trying to solve that sort of narrow piece of the pie, where in my consultancy, I see us spending a significant amount of our time just managing all these different components and figuring out what's compatible with what, and then doing the upgrades. So we built this tool to help us basically scan the cluster, figure out what's running in it, look at what's compatible with what, and do the upgrades more efficiently. Does that kind of cover the scope of the question?
I think so. I think when I was kind of like more of an engineer, I was working with kind of like Ruby on Rails and kind of Python and stuff. And we used to have package managers, right? And so you kind of like, okay, you like we install some new thing, you got to update the kind of like gem, and then you got to like ask the package manager, you're like, okay, like give me all the new versions of all the kind of like different kind of like gems, and one gem breaks some other kind of gem, and you're like, okay, now I have to like, I'm in debugging hell, basically, dependency hell, right? And so, is this something similar to that, where you're like, okay, we kind of know all the kind of different dependencies that kind of exist there. We scan for them. We look at kind of the versions. We compare against kind of like, some of the dependency, the breakage kind of is like out there, right? It's kind of like if you look through all the change logs of the different kinds of things, you can kind of see that this thing would kind of break. And so
they publish compatibility matrices, right? So part of what we do currently is we go look at all of those, we pull them into our matrix database,
scan everybody,
figure out what's compatible with what. In some cases, we do testing if they don't publish or we're not sure. We'll test components, make sure they're compatible. Right now, we're just doing it for just what our clients are using, but obviously we look to massively expand that with this project. But yes, very similar. We're essentially a package manager for Kubernetes in a way. The difference is that we don't break things, right? We don't just upgrade everything sort of blind. We look at what's actually compatible with what, and then do upgrades intelligently.
Got it. Okay, so maybe kind of two kind of deeper questions. So there's kind of an information piece of this where you need to kind of know you're in the business of kind of knowing what's compatible and what's not compatible and what's going to likely break. One of the sources of information from that is obviously they publish their own kind of like things on this, and that's great. You suck that stuff in, and then there's stuff that maybe people kind of like don't publish or they kind of missed or whatever. And okay, maybe you guys kind of do some of your own, and so you supplement kind of that information, run the scans. That's fair. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you actually kind of do the updating themselves. You actually do kind of like the updates. And so you actually apply some of these kind of like changes and that kind of stuff. That's part of the product too.
That will be, yes. We haven't built that out yet because my consultancy basically is just informational. We scan it, we look at what's compatible, we figure out what needs to be upgraded.
And then
right now there's a couple main paths, like ways that clients manage their cluster. There's like Git flow where they check it all into like a repository. There's a few other like tools and integrations. Some people use like the AWS command line directly. So that's part of what we're going to be building out, is the integrations with these enterprise kind of management things so that this can be done in a more automated fashion.
Okay, got it. And so what are you guys thinking that kind of like uh almost like what does that kind of like interface kind of like look like, right? So there's probably, I mean, there's a version of this where it's just like terminal basically, and I'm like, okay, I kind of like set your
That's
thing.
the current version. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I
Yeah.
can be like, hey, do a scan. It does the scan. It comes back to me. It's like, okay, here's some of the areas, and then I can go in and fix it myself, right? Are you
Yeah.
thinking the upgrading part is also kind of a similar thing? Maybe there's like a scan. There's like you got to run scan. You got there's an upgrade function and it automatically runs scan first, and then it's kind of like, okay, if everything's okay, then you confirm. Or is that kind of how you're thinking about it?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
I think there's two components that are sort of missing for this to
Yeah.
be a really a customer
Yeah.
facing product and not an internal tool. And that's the UI and then the integrations into the cluster management. So it needs some kind of UI. So it's not just command line, right? Like people
Yeah.
want to see things. In the Kubernetes world, there's this kind of concept of what they call single pane of glass, where it's
Yeah.
like see all of your clusters and what's
Yeah.
running in them in one place.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we aim to be, but for the
Okay.
upgrade landscape, right?
Yeah.
So that like you can see what's running in your clusters,
Yeah.
do the upgrade, and it automatically hooks into. We're not trying to be opinionated about how you run the clusters
Yeah.
because enterprises don't like to be locked into one kind of way
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
doing things or one
Yeah.
vendor. A lot of them are like hybrid with on-prem and cloud or whatever, right? So we're just trying to basically hook into however you're doing your clusters today and managing them, we're hooking into that and not trying to tell you how to run them.
Got it. And this is going to be kind of used by engineering teams, right? I mean, I don't think product managers aren't going to kind of like want to
Yeah.
work on this stuff. So engineering teams, okay. Um, and at least on some of the engineering teams that I kind of like had here, we had kind of like engineering ops, right? Or kind of like server ops and kind of this kind of stuff. Are you
Yeah.
thinking this is used by them, or do you think you want to replace kind of like some of those kind of like jobs kind of eventually?
This is used by them. This will
Okay.
basically, so typically today they'd be called a platform team or a DevOps
Well,
team or,
sure.
whatever, something like that. But this would be a tool that's used by them. Basically, they're spending, based on my experience in my
Yeah.
consultancy, they're spending probably 30, 40% of their time managing these upgrades and figuring out what's compatible with what and handling all of that. There's compliance concerns, right? They have to do like
Oh,
upgrades
yeah,
of things for security
compliance.
patches on like a bi-weekly or monthly basis
Yeah,
and all
sure.
that stuff as well. So that's a ton of overhead that we're not trying to replace them. We're just trying to
Yeah.
kind of augment them and help them do that stuff
Got it.
faster because it's boring work that no one really wants to do. They want to be working on productive things. They don't want to be doing upgrades, right? So
Yeah.
if we can automate that for them, let them get back to more productive stuff, I think that's a huge value prop.
But if you're
Actually,
looking
that
at it from a CTO standpoint, it's hard to say we want to replace them, but from a cost standpoint, we are thinking that ultimately it does replace a certain number of roles and that justifies the cost.
yeah, you don't
Right.
need all of them, right? I mean, you're making people more
Exactly.
efficient. So it's like, okay, this
Yeah.
took three people. Okay, maybe we get by with two now, right? This kind of
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah,
That's
or
it.
they're
Um,
able to just work on more productive things, right? Where
yeah.
they can get stuff done that they couldn't do before, right?
Um, uh, just as totally random, but I was just kind of like thinking, actually, this is probably kind of a place too where probably some useful features are if you could actually kind of produce reports for the kind of the DevOps kind of like people so that they can kind of show all these dependencies. Because I imagine a bunch of DevOps people, they have to kind of manage all these dependencies, but they also have to communicate these dependencies to other people and help
Yeah,
them understand. And that's a lot of work. And so
a
if
lot
the
of
tool
third
can kind of
party sort
generate
of
some stuff, right, to kind
discussion.
of being like, okay, cool. See, Caleb, you've been a CTO before, I'm sure. It's like you ask for some report on kind of dependencies and all of that kind of stuff, right? Then somebody's got to put that together. If the tool can kind of show you that so that, they don't have to kind of put that super helpful for you, right? You're like, okay, cool. Here's kind
Yeah,
of where we're at, right?
even better. A lot of teams use compliance tooling now that automatically scans things and looks for like compliance issues,
Oh,
and being able to hook into those and automatically report when things are upgraded or
right.
security issues are patched. That's a
Yeah.
huge value prop because that's done manually typically currently, where they're going and looking like, okay, what version is running here, what version is running where. If you can hook into those tools, that's one of the main things that we get requests for with our clients when we're doing stuff. They're like, hey, what's running here? We need to figure out what versions things are on so that
Yeah.
for our compliance report, like have we upgraded things, that sort of stuff. So that is a huge thing, not only for CTOs but for compliance and security as well.
Yeah, and I guess the kind of like the customers you guys are going have to actually kind of think about this. It's like, yeah, early stage startups, three people, whatever, they're not worried about any of this, right? But
Yeah,
like you get to a certain size.
enterprises are SOC compliant, ISO compliant, those
Yeah.
types of things,
Yeah.
PCI, HIPAA, et cetera. Yeah,
Yeah. Especially in the US, right? Um,
yeah.
okay. Um, That's super helpful. Okay, now I'm gonna well, I guess both of you could answer. I was like, okay, I gotta ask some questions that Tim to get Tim in here.
I'm good. I'm happy.
But Caleb, it's super helpful because I feel like, I think at least for me, I'm like, okay, I always kind of think about investments of like, okay, we know what problems are people solving for. I'm kind of a purist in this sense, right? Where I'm kind of like, okay, is this a problem? Okay, what's the nuts and bolts of the problem? Okay.
Sure.
And Caleb, you've actually kind of been doing this as part of your consulting, but Tim, it sounds like you've actually, I mean, last time we talked to you, you actually started kind of like trying to sell this and talking to people about this and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe talk to me a little bit about what you're kind of learning on the like sales side of this, right? You've probably been talking to kind of like CTOs, you probably talked to some kind of like DevOps people, like maybe talk to me about what
Mostly
you've been learning
focused
on
on
that side.
CTOs. I think
Okay.
because what we identified is that, we're not first to market. We're not a first mover, but we're practically a first mover. There's one other guy that kind of focuses on this sort of narrow problem in the US, and their approach is bottoms up, and they focus on, creating a community around developers and providing value to developers and sort of trying to sell to developers who don't have decision power. And we want to look at it a different way and go at it towards CTOs and talk about ROI and things that matter.
Hmm.
And in my approach to kind of identifying how to scale this, I've mostly been speaking to CTOs. And
Hmm.
the idea has been to look at different tiers of CTOs. CTOs in mid-sized companies, enterprise. For example, tomorrow we have a call with the CTO of Central, like the Thai conglomerate.
Hmm.
And we've been looking at sort of partner networks as well. So speaking to people like NFQ, Seven Peaks, and people who ultimately use these products for their hundreds of customers and resell it at a discount.
I see.
So we've kind of identified a variety of different approaches to this. I think at first we're going to be sticking to sort of mid-size, which is shorter sales cycle, kind of what I'm
Yep.
experienced with, rather
Yep.
than like full-on enterprise sales cycles. But what like the number one objections that we've ran into, and we've already kind of solved it, which is great. But the number one objection, especially with enterprise clients we spoke to, is okay, yeah, this makes sense from an ROI standpoint, and we definitely have this problem. That was for me the validation point rather than how to sell it, validating the problem. They said, yeah, even if we have a positive ROI on a product like this, we have to go through budgeting cycles that can take,
Mhm.
9 to 12 months in order to budget this. And we would work with you, but within 12 months. And for us, that's a bit of a slow project process. So what we figured out is, okay, but you guys have sort of server budgets, you have cloud budgets, you have an AWS budget that has leeway. And that's something we learned very quickly, is that they have usually, 10 to 20% leeway on their current cloud spend with AWS or Azure. And if we can become a line item in their budget and just a quick add-on to their current budget on the cloud spend, then they don't have to get approvals for their budget and they can immediately tag it along to their existing costs. So what we figured out is that we can become one of the sort of apps on the marketplace for AWS or Azure. And instead of having to go through budget approvals, they can immediately add that cost to their existing AWS budget. And we can be in business within a few months, basically. So what we figured out is the first thing to do if we're going to get to market on this is be available on all of the cloud marketplaces so that we can just become a line item to any of the people we speak to, whether it's mid to large enterprises. So that's been the biggest learning. But other things that I've realized is that I haven't sold to CTOs necessarily. So I've started exploring it. And my sort of perspective these days is a lot of community-based sales, a lot of content-based sales.
Yep.
And like there's a ton of amazing, really narrow events around Cube. So there's like KubeCon, there's like a variety of sort of DevOps specific events where we can participate, be speakers, or just have booths. And those will probably have a huge momentum on our sales, especially given the size of our ACV, which, we don't need a ton of clients to be at a 1 million AR or 5 million AR. You kind of saw what we put in the ask page there.
Yep.
But essentially, like we need to focus on a few clients and essentially work towards that rather than trying to spray and pray and go after 100,000 clients, which we don't need in this type of business. So that's the learning essentially over the last months. As you know, this kind of project came along very, very fast and we moved quite fast. But yeah, spoke to probably like 7 CTOs now, mid to large size. And for everyone, the same thing is like, yes, we have this problem. And if you are a cloud, like on the cloud marketplace, we can work with you pretty quickly. Those are the big learnings.
How did you figure out to kind of lump it in with that kind of like budget?
That's Caleb
I
right
sell the same way in my consultancy.
Oh, I see.
So I see we have clients that do this. They got on the marketplaces for the same reasons. So I've already seen it. happening. And the cloud marketplace on AWS alone is, I want to say,
It's huge.
I think it's like 7 billion or something right now. It's absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are starting to do this. It's kind of a new trend in enterprise sales. So yeah, I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this with kind of Salesforce kind of plugin. I mean, there's some of these things get big enough where actually kind of like the plugins kind of like become quite big, the marketplaces themselves. Okay, and Tim, is there kind of like how when you're kind of selling it to kind of CTOs and stuff, like are you kind of like it's a cost saving thing, it's a time saving thing, like what's the thing you're kind of like going in there with?
Well, it's a bit of both, like time saving / cost saving. So it depends how they think about it. Because Caleb mentioned where we don't want to replace people. Some people have less of a qualm with replacing staff if it saves them cost. Others just feel, okay, you're saving time, so we can work on more core projects.
Yep.
But it's going to be something that we have to feel when we speak to people, and that's always the case in enterprise sales. It's hard to have a single message. It's really adapted to the person, right?
Got it. And how did you kind of get in contact with these people? Are you just kind of doing LinkedIn outreach?
Just networking so far, like just people I know. And it's kind of interesting because just from the people I know, we've already spoken to some relatively marquee clients. And that's kind of interesting for us because all of the models that we built are based on like super mid-sized companies that have like 15 to 20 clusters. And we're now talking to, massive conglomerates like Central Tomorrow that probably have thousands of clusters running. And all of a sudden the ACVs are in the 7 to 8 figures, right? It's ridiculous. So that's what's been interesting to me is that just within our reach, and this is still Southeast Asia, we haven't even reached our network in North America, and we hope to be able to do that through our investors and through like our own connections. But just in Southeast Asia, we're already looking at some pretty impressive sort of ACV numbers, which is very encouraging to me.
And maybe kind of like one kind of like last topic, and then I have to go do this, but basically I'm on the other side here where I have to go talk to kind of like one of our LPs.
Okay.
But maybe one last question here is Kubernetes is used by like I'm trying to think about what this like ceiling size of companies that are kind of doing, right? And so look, like I mean, Google kind of started out with kind of Kubernetes and some of these kinds of stuff, right? So do some of these like huge companies at some point are they kind of trying to solve this by at some point if they're I mean Google probably built their own kind of internal software to deal with a bunch of this kind of stuff or whatever, right? But is like Central when you're talking to them, do they just like did they just hire a bunch of like DevOps kind of like people and they're like, okay, we don't have software, we just have tons of people?
Yeah, so they have a lot of people and they build scripts. But these scripts, first of all, they need to be updated constantly. Anytime they add components, the scripts don't include them. So it's like just the same amount of work, but they feel they're automating it rather than having a third party automate it and have it up to speed always. It's the basic of SaaS, right? You can always do it yourself, or you can pay someone slightly less and have it better.
Yeah. There's a huge economy of scale component here where they're all doing this ad hoc with scripts, and if we can do it in one place for hundreds of clients, then like it's just way more efficient.
Yeah, I mean this is like the software thing tale of kind of like all time, right? It's like, okay, well, your scripts probably suck. And so why don't you just like pay me and I have the best scripts because everybody uses them and I spend all my time just making these scripts, right? So
we're going to have a nice UI on it, right? So it's not just
and it's not going to be scripts.
See it and they can visualize it and report on it like you mentioned and things like that. So
also, they can blame it on you instead of their own team if something kind of like goes wrong.
I mean, there is an aspect of that.
There's a part of that, right?
Yeah.
100%. Yep.
Especially kind of the larger companies. I mean, if you run an actual software kind of like company, then you're like that doesn't fly too much, but larger companies you can get by with it. Okay. Maybe then talk to me a little bit, and this is kind of like more detailed stuff. Caleb, you're running your consulting company. This came out of something you were working on, right? So
yes.
You guys are, and Tim, maybe like you guys are spinning this kind of out of the consulting kind of like company, and then is the new entity going to be like partly owned by the consulting, just mechanics of kind of like, okay.
I want to keep them separate for a couple reasons. I kind of want to get out of the consulting game at some point soonish. I've looked at sales and things like that. But as you probably know, multiples on consulting companies are pretty low. So I'm probably going to end up hiring someone to replace me, which will make my consultancy a lot less profitable, obviously. Hiring someone that can do what I do is not cheap. But I'm okay with that. And then eventually we may bring some clients over, that kind of thing. But I think in terms of the tool itself, the IP is owned by the consultancy right now. And I would just, essentially sign it over to the new entity. and then maybe grant my consultancy like a license to use the existing version in the way that we currently do.
And Caleb, is this something that do you want to work on this company kind of like, you want to kind of move away from consultancy? I understand you have to kind of like manage that and that kind of stuff. Is the idea that you longer term want to work on this?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the consultancy is great. They kick off a lot of free cash flow, things like that, but it's a grind, right? And I'm seeing just the economics of like the way that remote work is going and stuff.
Yeah.
There's less value in being like, I had teams in the Philippines, Ukraine, Argentina, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And there's less value in that now because companies just go directly to those countries and hire themselves now. They don't need a middleman as much. So I'm seeing margins getting squeezed a bit in the space. And I think that's a kind of a long-term trend that's going to make it harder and harder to be kind of a niche consultancy in the tech space. And so, yeah, I'm very much committed to, sort of sunsetting the consultancy and getting onto this full time. I think it's the way that things are going long term. Everything's becoming more of a platform, more of a tool, that kind of thing. And it's, you need less and less consultants, I think.
Scales a bit more too, right? So
100%.
I have a lot of kind of consultant friends who are kind of like in a thinking similar to you. Okay, final question. Caleb, I saw that you are connected to Oren Etzioni. Do you know that name?
At where?
I don't know. Oren Etzioni. He used to run AI2 in Seattle, which is the AI kind of like research institute in Seattle.
Okay, I have a ton of connections on LinkedIn because I basically use LinkedIn for most of our cold outreach. Either I met him at a conference at one point or something, but unfortunately the name doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. No, I just was curious because he was my co-founder of the first company.
Really?
So yeah.
Oh,
he actually used to be my CS professor in school.
Ah, okay.
And so anyway, I just saw that and I was like, oh, not a lot of people are connected with him. And then he ran Paul Allen's AI Research Institute for like 10 years.
Right. Okay.
Like yeah.
Okay.
So anyway,
interesting. Yeah. I unfortunately have so many LinkedIn connections now. It's hard to keep up.
No, totally.
But, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I've got to run off to my call. Thank you for kind of answering all my questions and educating me on kind of Kubernetes and kind of like the business and stuff. Tim, we've been kind of like talking about this. It's awesome that you guys are kind of like doing this. Caleb, I will be transparent with you. When I met with Tim, I was like, yeah, Tim, you should do the Kubernetes thing. That sounds like the thing to kind of like do.
You're sort of riding a wave right now with Kube, right? It's totally. So big and it's just growing exponentially. Yep. So yeah.
So let me kind of go talk to my kind of like team about it. And Tim, I'm going to see you like tomorrow and stuff. So let me go talk to kind of like my team and then we can kind of get back to you guys kind of like pretty quickly here. And so, let me just kind of like,
by the way, like I'm staying in Southeast Asia. We're going to target Southeast Asian clients and North American clients just because you have some parameters for your fund.
No, but
make sure
you are in Southeast Asia. So
oh yeah, I'm staying here.
You're already kind of
well, and my wife's Filipino, and we're kind of thinking about a move back to Asia at some point. So, there's that as well.
Our rule is just a founder has to kind of be here or has to kind of target here. Okay. Tim is already here. And if you want the hack, Tim, just take our money and then move. Right?
I don't want that. I love Southeast Asia.
I mean, I know you do, right? Asia. But like if you want the hack, that's the hack, right? Wow. Like so. But it's all good.
That's cool.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow then.
Yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Caleb, thanks for kind of doing the call from Italy.
Likewise. Thanks for the time. Soon.
Cool.
Thank you.
See you guys.